Yeah. So the question is there a difference between an object and a lookup table or hash table, whatever they're called in any other language? And the answer is no. It's basically the same thing, because there is no such thing as a hash table, but you're just misappropriating objects for hash tables, and you're just using objects as a lookup table, or, well, anything you want basically, or enums, for example. We don't have enums in JavaScript, but how do we do it? We do it with objects. Apparently, it's very, very handy, the object, so you can do a lot of stuff with it, and we do that. Okay. We have 2 minutes. Please.
Last week you told us that we want to declare a new object as a person. We shouldn't use like person 7 is a new person. We should use the name. For example, a team is a new person. But if I want to get the name, team is name. So I still have to add a property name of this to this
Yes.
person.
Yes, of course. Again, this class is designed to take you from the very beginning of programming to doing your first backend application with Node.js. So it's important that we get the basics covered, because like this week is also a little bit of a recap of the last week plus Node.js. But from next week onwards, we will dive into this thing really deep. So I need your full attention, both to your homeworks and generally the basics. So who didn't do the homework? Raise your hands if you didn't do your homework. Yeah, didn't. Cool. All right, so please make sure. I think I received your homework, no? Yeah, you, no? So the question is, who didn't do their homework? Yes. Okay, raise your hands again if you didn't do your homework. Cool. And there's no shame in that, or maybe a little bit, but not too big. But yeah, please, please complete your homework. Yeah, please.
Is it normal that you get this error all the time in the code? It's like undefined and undefined?
No, it's not.
The object has already been defined.
Yes, the object has already been defined is an error that we also tackled in within the class last week. But apart from that, uncode exception is not normal. It's an exception that you couldn't even catch, so it's a little bit alarming. But if you still have the same problem, just ask one of my friends and they will come and sort it out for you. Again, make sure that you do the homeworks. Make sure that you are on top of the material we cover on the class. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, because there is no wrong question, there is no dumb question, there is no silly question. There are just questions that are asked and that get a response, and there are other questions that are not asked, and the second one shouldn't exist. Just shoot out all your questions, either here or on Slack, either in the public channel or through direct messages. Just shout out, please. So the question is, the code that I wrote, is it somewhere? Actually, I also lost it, but fortunately, one of the homeworks has that code. I don't remember whom, but I can look it up. On Slack, somebody submitted the code. Is it you? All right, maybe you can share the link. Because on GitHub, somebody wrote the whole thing down. It was exactly as we finished the class, before I renamed the variables to Arman and Miri. So it's pretty much everything we did at the end. Obviously, the first thing is not there. The first few commands are not there. But yeah, you can find it. It's one of the links on Slack. Maybe this encourages you to check out other people's homeworks, and that's a big plus. Okay, it's 7:03, and I want to start with a short story. And maybe a question that we want to define. What is a computer? Do you know what a computer is? raise your hands and tell me what you think a computer is, please.
What is a computer? It is a machine, technology machine that helps us to work with different programs.
It's a machine that helps us to work with different programs, yeah?
Yes, and to get internet.
To get internet?
Yes, to get information, to read files, and
Yeah.
to create new things by ourselves.
Yeah, to create new stuff.
Yes.
Okay, that's a very nice definition. Raise your hand and tell me another definition of a computer, please. It's a machine that follows the commands that we tell it to do stuff. All right, perfect. Any other definition of a computer? Please raise your hands. Like a calculator? Yeah, please. A system? All right, fine. Please. Sorry?
Elaborated on and off switch.
Oh, elaborated on and off switch. That's very philosophical, but that's in the end true. Yeah, we have a lot of, actually billions of on and off switches that make up a computer. So data processing machine. Amazing. These are all valid answers that I really wanted to receive. Any other definition of a computer? Please, don't be shy. Raise your hand and speak up. This is your meetup. No. So we all agree on these definitions, right? So here is the real definition of a computer. A computer is not a machine. It is the name of a job. It's a job done by humans for a very, very long time, for over 100 years actually. And the job is basically to calculate stuff by hand, because it's a job from an era where we didn't have anything digital, where we didn't have any machines, not even analog machines. There were no machines back then when they created the job computer. It's a job. It's like, I don't know, a teacher, right? It's a job. And it originated in late 18th century and rose in the 19th century. And the main purpose of a computer, which is a real person, was to count numbers, add up numbers, and make calculations and come up with insights by using numbers for a business. Did anybody hear this thing before? Raise your hands if you heard this before. 1, 2, yeah. Basically, hello, welcome. Computer is a job that is primarily done by women. It's a job that 99.9% women did. And it relied heavily on mathematics. And currently, the person whom we deem as the first person who came up with the idea of a programming language, Ada Lovelace, is a woman. She dreamt about a programming language in late 18th century for looming machines, for a friend. She was a mathematician and a philosopher. So she created a programming language for a looming machine entirely on her head, which we didn't have the tools to implement, but that's the first instance of a programming language ever. And there were computers, people, up until 40s and 50s when this thing became an automated job, because we had machines, analog machines with transistors, with tubes, vacuum tubes, not transistors, but vacuum tubes, to do some calculations for us. Still, then, primarily women operated these machines. Okay, so this is a profession started by women, pioneered by women. Do you know what a compiler is? Raise your hands if you ever heard of a compiler. It is something, for example, that lets you write JavaScript today and have the machines understand it. Because normally, as one of you pointed out, machines only understand ones and zeros all the time. They don't understand anything else. How do you convert the thing that I have here, like a text, welcome to meeting 2, whatever, to something that the machines can understand? You need a compiler for that. And the first compiler is designed and implemented, again, by a woman. Does anybody know the name? Grace Hopper. Where did it come from? Yay, thank you. Grace Hopper. She was an army officer in, I guess in the Navy, I'm not sure, in the United States. And she basically founded this thing on her own, like the field, the modern computer science. And then people followed up. Like she came up with the idea of a compiler because she thought, we are human, we understand words, we understand commands. Ones and zeros are a little bit harder for us, so why don't I create something to make this easier? This was, again, even in 70s, primarily computers were operated by women in businesses. And you can see a lot of ads on newspapers and magazines telling, you know, how glorious the life of a computer operator, because now they became machines and women became computer operators, and you know how much money they make off of it. And then what happened is patriarchy took over because machines became digital, they were widely available, they knew that money was in this business, and they came and took over. And unfortunately, you know, starting from the 70s and 80s, especially in the US, we see a drop in engineering schools where beforehand, more or less, 2 genders were equal in students ratios and in graduate ratios. Especially mid-80s, we see a huge drop. And somehow then it's, I don't know, instilled in the culture that, you know, computers are primarily for men, or boys like games, video games, and then they do programming and stuff. That's completely untrue. The real thing is, this is primarily a women's job. There are a lot of reasons for that, and I could go on and detail them, but the idea is, and why we're doing this thing, this whole JavaScript class, for example, is this, we want to revert that. We want to revert it to its basics, okay? And there are a lot of men here. I'm sorry for them, but you actually suck at software engineering. You are inferior to women when it comes to software engineering. And we are here to revert that. We are here to make sure people who deserve it get it, who deserve their place get it back. That's why this is primarily targeted for women, because there is a huge gender gap right now in this industry. Like 11% women and 89% men are in engineering and in a software engineering workforce. And we want to make it at least 50-50, which, you know, will benefit everybody and the industry, because all the complexity and all the bugs that are coming out are primarily, and I would claim this, primarily because men can't do this thing. So we have to up our games, okay? We have to learn this, make this happen, go out in the industry and show how it's done, how it should be done. And I've looked into most of the homework submitted before 5 p.m. today. I didn't have time to look at the recent submissions, but I was very, very proud of what you all did. With the knowledge that you have from the first week, it was amazing. And maybe you took a lot of time, you put a lot of effort in that, maybe you didn't, but the result was really good. It was beyond my expectations. And I'm really happy to see that you are here again the second week. And I hope we will continue like this with a lot of people. And in the end, finally, be able to contribute back to the culture by showing, how it's actually meant to be done. So that was kind of a long introduction for 10 minutes. Sorry if I bored you. But this is how I look at it. And this is why I'm doing this thing. So now that you know what a computer is, let's shift our perception of reality, what the environment gives us, and try to put it on a new perspective, which, is what it deserves anyway for 200 years. So I'm going to start with Node.js today. Who doesn't have Node.js installed? 1, 2, 3, all right, 4, 5. Good. You are in big trouble. The people who were here last week and who still don't have Node.js installed are in some trouble. I want you to go and install Node.js. It's basically nodejs.org. You download it for your machine. Download this one, the latest and the greatest, 8.7. And we will start working with that. If you need help, again, raise your hand, ask for an instructor, or the instructors will actually see your hands and will rush to your help, get you started, and help you install this thing. I hope the internet will allow us to do this all together. There's another thing that I want you to install. It's called Visual Studio Code, which is an open source IDE developed in JavaScript by Microsoft and other open source engineers. Raise your hands if you don't have Visual Studio Code. Great. That is the second thing that you need to download. And make sure to download the Insiders Edition. It's okay if you don't have the older version, don't bother. You can download the new version at home. There are no huge differences, but still, I like to be on the edge. I like to be, to have the latest and greatest of everything. So get the Insiders Edition if you can. And for the newcomers, definitely get the Insiders Edition. Download it and open it. This is sort of what you will get when you first open Visual Studio Code. And I will talk a little bit about Node.js and meanwhile try to have this screen. Raise your hand if you have this. All right, great. Sorry?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
The question was like if you had the Visual Studio Code installed, just raise your hand. All right. You probably have the sidebar on the left. Don't worry about that. I have it on the right because that's how I like it. The best thing is you can customize the hell out of this. Everything you see, every parameter and every color and etc. is customizable. So you can spend hours, if you like, to customize this, and I would encourage you to do so. Find the colors that work best for you. Find some plugins that work for you, and I will talk about some of them. Please. Yes, it's mostly okay, but I would really encourage you to get the last version after the class. So for today, it doesn't matter. Yeah, but for next week, please make sure you have the latest version. Because unlike Visual Studio Code, there are huge differences between the version that probably you have and the latest version. And we'll be using the latest version.
And is it okay to install the version we use today only locally? Only locally?
Yeah, of course. No, like it will be locally anyway. Like all the installations you do. Yeah. Okay, that's a nice idea. That's a good idea. Please take some pictures. All right. So, what is Node.js and why are we here? Like, what will we learn in this course? Node.js is a JavaScript environment that lets you build applications on the backend that run on the server. And like it's a primary reason anyway. And as with everything, we abuse that and do desktop applications as well. But still, Node.js is primarily geared towards building backend applications with JavaScript. How do they do that? They do that by taking the core of Google Chrome or Chromium and stripping away all the stuff that is necessary for the user interface for displaying the web pages and putting them away and just working with that core. That core actually enables you to run JavaScript. That core is the core that we used the previous week to run the code that we wrote, like the classes and the instructions and the functions that we wrote. So that is actually something on its own that can be ripped out of Chrome, Google Chrome or Chromium, the open source project. And Node.js is basically built on that. It's called V8. It's the engine that runs JavaScript. Maybe you heard of it before, maybe you didn't. But yeah, it's some piece of code that understands JavaScript and executes it, executes the commands. So what they did was they pulled V8 out of Chromium, wrote some more code on it so that they could run it standalone on its own, and so that when given a JavaScript file like this, it would be able to understand it, parse it, understand the instructions, and run it, and give you the output. Now the result is amazing. The result is basically a revolution in how we do backend software and engineering. And I will talk a little bit about that in the coming hours, but it's rightful to say that Node.js actually changed the face of backend engineering. Maybe one big reason was it brought front-end developers back to backend. So front-end developers were able to finally create backend applications because they knew JavaScript. And beforehand, they had to learn another language, but now they don't. Basically, they have the same language that they use on the front end, and now they can do backend applications. So the number of people who were able to create backend applications, went from, I don't know, something like 100 to 400, 500, tripled, quadrupled with Node.js. That's why it's a huge buzz right now. And as I already said last week, you can do anything with it. I actually have a couple of desktop applications run or done in JavaScript and Node.js, and also front-end HTML and CSS. So anything you imagine, you can do it with JavaScript. This course is designed to give you the basics of backend engineering, but know that anything is possible and anything is within your fingertips, and you will learn a single language to do mobile applications, to do desktop applications, to do IoT applications, or a smart fridge. It's possible. Now, we have something called a graduation for this course. And let me reiterate, we have some, let's say, awards for people who successfully graduate and complete their graduation project. We have 2 tickets to .js, a conference, a JavaScript conference, which is, one of the nicest JavaScript conferences out there. And then I work for a company called UNU GmbH, and I want to offer internship to at least one person here who's successful with the backend applications at Node.js, or maybe even more. And I will also pull some other people from the industry around Berlin for a similar opportunity. So I hope to make something real out of this. And I hope you will like these things and kind of prepare for them. But what we ask you to do for graduation is actually to come up with an application idea. Just dream of something that you think will be useful, something that will solve some of your problems, that you can deploy on a server, like on a web page or anything, and that you can use, that solves one of your problems. One of you said, I implemented a simple polling mechanism for my team. Like, that is only the beginning. You can do a lot. And if you don't have any ideas, please come to us for ideas. Or if you want to validate your ideas, please come to us and we will work with you to make them happen. But the goal is, in the next 6 weeks, to come up with an application that we can deploy to production and run, and that will solve our problems, some of our problems, at least some real problems. It could be a note-taking application, a to-do application. It could be a scheduler, room scheduler, I don't know, some booking application, whatever you can think of. And we'll work together, all the instructors and myself included, we'll work together with you to build that application. Obviously, it will be your effort, it's your task to build it, but we will do code reviews for you and we will help you out if you have any questions or problems. So that is how we define graduation, and we will ask you to present it on stage if you want at another event after the 8th week, the last lecture. So we'll have a lot of opportunity to showcase what we built, and I'm looking forward to the results. How does it sound? You like it? Cool. Okay, let's get back to JavaScript. Now, this is the welcome screen, right? This is where we start. Let's start by creating a new file, a JavaScript file, and we will run something on it, somewhat like a recap of last week, and we will then move on with new stuff. So I start by clicking New File, all right? And it gives me, and I hope everybody can see the screen, right? Do you have any problems? Like, is the font too small or something? All right, perfect. And what we have is a blank file. I will now make this a JavaScript file and write some code in it. Now, if you write something in it, like, if you remember, we used console log last week, right? To print something on the screen. There is no screen here. You may be asking, where am I going to see that thing? It will come in a couple of seconds. But I start with, console log and the infamous message, hello world. Okay? Now, if you remember last week, when we wrote this in the browser, it had some color, right? The words, different words, had different colors. Console had a different color, log had a different color, and the message here, a string message, had a different color. That was because the browser understood it was a JavaScript file, and what you wrote was JavaScript. But unfortunately, this is just an untitled file, so there is nothing that indicates that this is a JavaScript file. How do we do that? Let's first save the file. When you hit Control S or Command S, you have this screen that allows you to save the file. Please give it a name of index.js here. I already saved one. So please call it index.js and save it. And if you do, then you will see there is some color. The colors on your screen may differ. This is something I fine-tuned to my preferences. So don't worry if you see it in a different color. But the idea is this is now a JavaScript file the IDE, Visual Studio Code, understands. And how do I execute this? How do I run this thing? So what I do is I go to the View menu, and there's something called an integrated terminal. Tell me if you see it in your menus. Raise your hands if you see the integrated terminal. All right, that's good. Click it, it has a shortcut that will come in handy. It's Control plus an accent. I don't know what it's called, but basically gives you something like this. It opens up a new window and shows you some path, something. Okay? Now here's the tricky part where I need the co-instructors a lot. Because in the terminal, we have to find where you saved the file, because we will be running that. So maybe there is a chance that the terminal opened up in the right folder of the file that you saved. Most likely it didn't, but if you're running on a Mac or a Linux computer, you can do pwd, the working directory, or you can do ls to give you the contents of the folder, and you see that there is an index.js file. So if you don't, you have to cd ... or cd a folder name or something and find where you are. So I asked the instructors to move around and help everybody find the file in the terminal. And how do you know if you found it? You can, if you're on Windows, you can write dir, which will give you the file list. Or if you're on a Mac or a Linux computer, you can type ls, which will give you the contents of that directory. And you should see the file there, index.js. And here's the magic command. You write node index.js and run it by hitting enter. And you are supposed to see the output, hello world, on your screen. This is how you can check if you have it. Now, who did it already? Raise your hands if you already did it. Come on, you gotta be kidding me, really? You're amazing. Like you did see the output of hello world. This is good. All right, then I can maybe move on. If you didn't see it, if you type node index.js and you get an error, please call an instructor and raise your hand and they will come to help you. So if you can't find the folder around, as Diego just pointed out, just move your cursor over the name of the file, index.js, the tab, and it will give you the path. It will give you the folder path, and basically you can copy and paste it onto your terminal, like cd, and then go here and write it down, like tilde, projects, whatever, and it will give you the right folder. Okay, I will continue a little bit, very slowly, very carefully, so that no people are left behind, of what we did last week as an example. We started by defining variables and then functions, right? And one function we defined was the function that added two numbers. Let's just simply do that. Please follow me. So I define a function called add that has two parameters. One is number 1 and the other is number 2. And it returns their total. It just adds them up, right? Yay, wave your hands and it will come back. I guess the motion sensor is primarily back there, but yeah, wave back. Okay. So let's run this again. I get nothing else because I didn't print out anything. But let's use this. Let's add 3 and 5. Okay? And let's run this again. I still get nothing because I didn't print the result. I just added two numbers. What I do is I assign this result to a variable. Let's say const output equals add 3 plus 5. I run it again, I don't see anything. Why? Because I now have the result as a variable output, but I'm doing nothing with it, okay? What I can do is, I can have console log and run it again, and now I can see the result, 8. Now raise your hand if you get the result 8. All right, that's good. Whenever you get it, raise your hand so that I know when you have that. Or maybe Anna could help with the Russian keyboard. Nobody raised their hands. All right, good. Now, I have a problem with the setup because it's tedious, right? I write some code and then I go to another window and type something else like node index every time. This doesn't really work for me. I would much rather to have a quick evaluation or evaluation environment which kind of does this for me automatically. And that is where I introduce something called a debugger. Does anybody know what a debugger is? Raise your hand and tell me, please.
It's like part of the program, the IDE that lets you see what's happening in the program when it runs.
Yeah, perfect. It's part of the IDE, integrated development environment, like our Visual Studio Code here, that tells you what's happening with the code when it runs. And you can actually stop it, stop the execution, and then investigate what every variable is doing. Do you have another description? Yeah, I'm talking about you. Yeah. Okay. All right, this is what a debugger is. It helps you debug your code. Do you know where the name comes from? Debugging.
Insects in the big computers.
Yes, that's actually right. Insects in the big computers. And I guess it's still Grasshopper who discovered the first bug in a computer, in a machine. That was an actual bug which ate the cables. And that's why their code didn't work. And she took the bug out of the computer and taped it on their journal. And you can find the pictures online of the first bug, which is a real bug that's taped to a notebook, a page. And that's where the term comes from. Debugging is actually, finding bugs and removing them from our computer systems. Fortunately, we don't have that many real bugs nowadays, but still we have a lot of troubles when our code doesn't work. And like this is the act of simply removing them. So, how do we do debug? We have another menu here for Visual Studio Code that says debug. You click it and then you see start debugging. Okay? Click that and it will ask you something like this. Select environment. Which one do we select?
No.
Yay. We select Node.js because we're writing Node.js code, right? And then I click that, but nothing happened. Apparently something happened. There is something called a debug console here. Click that, and you will see this output. Hello world 8. Let's do that again. I'm going to debug, and I'm clicking start debugging. I choose Node.js, and I see the result there. So, there is another way of doing it. On the sidebar, you see an icon. like this, which is like a Ghostbusters icon. It's like no to bugs. It's a debug icon. Click that and you get this nice sidebar that lets you access the variables. There is a hand there, please. Yeah, thank you, Jessica. So there's another icon here that you can click to start debugging. Click Node.js again, and then you will get the results. Another instructor, maybe Tiago? There's a hand here. What? Oh, okay, you're busy. Someone else. Miri? Where's Miri? Back there? Okay. So there's another request for help here. John? Jessica? If you can? Yeah. Okay. So now we found a way to click something and get the result, right? I click that, I click Node.js, and I get the result. It's still annoying. I would like it to be faster. And Jessica? There's another hand here. Yeah, somebody's coming over. Oh, okay. No, she's not. But please feel free to help each other out. Otherwise, this may not work so well or scale so well.
I don't get asked.
That's good. And does it run?
Yeah.
That's very good. Yeah. Okay, so
I was just gonna ask, like that step that you're doing to choose the language. How are you doing that exactly?
I'm just clicking here, and it asks me, and I choose Node.js.
Ah, okay. I'm seeing a different behavior there.
It doesn't have to ask every time. Sometimes it just doesn't ask.
Yeah, it's like.
If it runs,
yeah,
immediately,
but it's
that's
saying there's
good.
like not a program available or something. Which
Oh,
I've
okay,
never
that's weird.
really seen that
That's
behavior.
weird. Okay,
happen.
let's look at this one, the next one.
Okay.
So how do I get rid of that or simplify this? There is some core here, some gear. It says configure or fix launch JSON. I click that. Oh, okay. I got an error. Please first open a folder in order to do advanced debugging configuration. All right. Okay. I will open a folder and okay. I opened the folder. All right. Let's open week 2. Something I prepared beforehand. Just open the folder that you had before. Hit this thing. It will ask you. Oh. Wait. Yeah. Okay, so we're back in the game. Sorry for the little bit confusion. But it asked me to open a folder. What I did is I opened the folder that contained my JavaScript file, index.js, okay? And I'm still doing the same thing, clicking start and choosing Node.js, and then it works. So what I do is I click this cork here, and it gives me the same window, and I click Node.js, and it creates something called the launch JSON.
Many of the people had the problem. They had to open the folder, not the file itself.
Okay.
That was the problem.
All right.
If the debugger doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like lots of people have it.
Again, I had to open the folder, the containing folder of the JavaScript file. So if you're getting errors, try that instead, and it will work. And still, if you need help, we have people around. So just, again, raise your hand. Anyway, who got this launch JSON? Oh, what? Yeah. No? Yeah. Who got this launch, Jason? Raise your hands. Cool. Don't, all right, no problem. Don't feel lost. We have a lot of people around to help you out. Like here, we have some trouble. There. So you click the cork, it gives you a window, you click Node.js and you get this. And from now on, it's just a single click to run the code. This was the hardest part of today's lecture, and we cleared that, and I'm really super happy about this. And now we can go on at full speed, basically. But what we did is we made sure our IDE, Visual Studio Code, can debug our code. Okay? Currently, it's just running it. I click play, and it gives me the output. And everybody has this output, and I'm very glad to have this. Now let's play with this a little. Okay? If you remember, I told you that we can pause and inspect what the code was doing while it was running. So how do I do that? There is a concept called breakpoints. And if you remember from last week, I told you that naming is extremely hard in computer science, but this time they nailed it. The name is really good. It's called a breakpoint. It's a point that you put somewhere in the code, and the execution takes a break. It takes a pause. It's a point where you put code, and that causes a break in the execution. That's why it's called a breakpoint. And how can you put breakpoints in your code? Just hover on the left side of your source code, and you'll see some dim red dot there. Please. Why would you do this? Because there is an error in my code. When I run it, I give it 3 and 5, okay? And I expect it to add those two numbers. I run it, but I get 10. That's not 3 plus 5. There's something wrong with the code. And of course, it's trivial to see that somebody sneaked in an additional +2 here. But in a real program, you won't be able to see that. In a real program, you have 20,000 lines that execute when you push a button. And there is a wrong output, and there is so many possibilities of things that could have gone wrong. So you have to identify where the problem is. You have to find the bug. Therefore, we have to go into the details of our execution, stop it midway to see if everything works up until that point. If it does, we'll move on. If it doesn't, we'll fix that. So yes, so we know which part the error is. Please. Is there a shortcut? Yes, the shortcut is F5. It's here, start debugging, F5. Yeah, you just press it and then it runs. So, that was a good example. Now we have a bug in our program. Let's debug it. What do? I put a breakpoint, and I was talking about that. Just hover on the left side, you'll see some little red dot lighting up. And whenever you click on a line, it will become a full bright red dot, which means this is the point where the execution will break, and you can inspect what it does all the time. So you can put them on every line, basically. It doesn't matter. Let's put it on every line, because why not? And then run the program again, hit F5, and you'll basically see that it ran. It removed some of the red circles, red points, because some of the lines were just empty. They didn't do anything, so there's no need to be to break the execution there, because Arguably, there's nothing there. But it stopped on the first line. So what do we have here? On the right for me and on the left for you, you'll see a tab that's called variables that gives you the variables in runtime. Something called watch, and I will go into a little bit more detail about that in a minute. Something called a call stack, which is the list of functions that executed until this point in time. Something called the breakpoints, which is a nifty short list for the breakpoints that I have here. And these are the line numbers 1, 3, 5, 7. Okay? And as a result, you may have this or you may not have this. We have the loaded scripts, which give me a kind of like a directory structure of the scripts that have been loaded into the memory. All right, so I have stopped on the first line of code, and you see there is no output yet. So here is a cool function called step over, and the shortcut for it is F10, and I would encourage you to use the shortcut. The step over basically simply executes that statement. You may have to click it twice to get to the next line, because there actually were two executions there. One defined the string, and the second actually logged it. But you pass to the second line, and you see the output. That's fine. It works as expected. I wanted it to print hello world, and it did, right? That worked fine. And I'm now on the second line. So you can see that you can debug the program step by step. And at every step, we check if we have the right output. And frankly, this is where software engineers spend most of their times. In a day, maybe you write code for an hour, and then you spend the next 6 hours debugging that code, if you're lucky. If you're not so lucky, if you're working with a legacy system done by an engineer who is working for another company, for his third company now, you may spend days on a single bug like this and still not find it. But you know, when people say software engineering is fun, it's kind of fun. Because like, there's a hand there. Guys, yeah. It's kind of fun because you really create some stuff, but it's not so fun when you have to deal with, you know, debugging for days on end, and when you want to understand why that thing doesn't work. So if you want to pick software engineering, this is why I started with debugging. This is where you will spend most of your days and most of your time. And the better you get at debugging, the faster you will get, the faster you'll get to the results, to the actual application that you want to build. So it will be a lot easier if you get this thing right. So the second line is actually defining a function. It's not doing anything, right? I just pass it with a single click on the step over function. And if you look to the variables tab, now you see add is defined here. Click it, it looks like a function. It gives you a lot of details which are unimportant at this point in time. But you can see that we now have a variable called add, which is actually a function that we can call. So here we have the debug console. You can actually interact with that as well. It's like the console in Chrome. So you can type add, now that we defined add, you can type add 5 plus 6, and you see it's also wrong. It gives you 13 instead of 11. That's too bad. 8 plus 8, come on, it's 16. Please.
Sorry, but I have to ask, how those red dots, they're not
Okay.
like this breakpoint, you have to join the random and then
Solved? Okay, good. So you can actually write, add, and give anything to it here and see if it works or not. But we kind of identified the problem, right? The addition doesn't work. So, and now I'm on line 5, which is where the actual addition happens. Let's move on and see what happens. Let's move one more line. It goes back to line 3. Why is that? Raise your hand and tell me why it went back to line 3. There must be a problem above it? Yes, it doesn't give us the right output, but the output that I had was something that I wrote in. It's not the actual execution. It was not the actual execution of the program. So I was on line 5. I wanted to execute that line. Or let's say I wanted to skip that line. And it went back to line 3. Why is that? Yeah. Yeah. So the answer is it needs to run the function. So line 5 told the program to execute the add function with these parameters. What does it mean to execute it? It has to go back to the definition of the add function and first run it and then get the output. That's why we went back to line 3, because that was where we defined the add function. And now we will try to run that. And if you see here, it helps you actually with the parameters. And on the left-hand side, in the variables tab, you also see, number 1 equals 3, number 2 equals 5 here, and for you it's on the left. And therefore, you know that you are inside the add function, and now number 1 and number 2 has a certain meaning, the numbers that we gave here, and it will do the execution. And if you hover over the numbers, you also see their actual values. This is immensely helpful when you want to debug what goes wrong in your code. You can hover over them or see them here, or you can actually add a watch parameter to watch for certain values. For example, I want to watch for what number 1 plus number 2 makes. I go to the watch section, click the plus button, write number 1 plus number 2, or num1 plus num2, hit enter, and I see the result. It's 8, okay? Which looks fine, because I was trying to add 3 and 5. 8 is a good response for that. But then I click, yay, dance over there. Yay, thank you. But then I click step over again, and I get to line 7. I clicked step over twice. I got to line 7, and output is now 10. Why is it 10? Because there's a bug in my code, which is +2, and I have to remove that. That adds 2 every time. So look at the debug console and hit F10 again, or step over again, and you will see that you still get 10 as an output. The program ran, and it also gave us the output. Do you also see these gray variables here? Okay, that's probably a plugin that I have installed ages ago, but you can find it, or maybe I can find it for you after the class, and you can install, because it's immensely helpful. It shows you the actual values of the variables. But we basically printed the output variable, and it's 10. Okay, this is enough of an exercise. I know where the bug is. I delete it, save the file again, run it again by hitting F5, and click through, step over and over again, and I see that the output is correct. Okay? Does it make sense? Raise your hand if it makes sense. Okay. Raise your hand if it doesn't make sense. And it's perfectly normal. Right. Any other? Now let's discuss. Why doesn't it make sense? What is your impression so far? You don't get it. Which part? Like, why do we debug, or how do we debug, or what is debugging, or what is a program? So the idea is basically we want to know what happens at every line, and there is a built-in function in the IDE that allows us to do that, which is called a breakpoint. So imagine that I remove these breakpoints and I have the only one at line 7, and I hit F5, it will just stop there. Basically stops wherever I command it to with the breakpoints. And that's a built-in functionality of the IDE. It has a debugger inside, and that's what helps us with this case. And yeah, the idea is we try to find where the error is, line by line. Does it make a little bit more sense now? Sorry, how do you know? How do you know that there's something wrong? Because let's imagine something is really wrong with our code, like this. You run it, and you get a wrong output. The output is 10, but you gave it 3 and 5, and you wanted it to add them. So you just look at the output and say, hey, there's something wrong. Like think about web pages. You have a button, you click it, but it doesn't work. It does nothing. Or it sends you to the wrong web page, for example. Or let's say you are on a food ordering website. You click plus near a food, like a burger. You want a burger. You click plus because you want to add 1 to your shopping cart, but it adds 2 of them. Bugs like these occur really frequently. Yes. Yeah. 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 That is a huge problem. That's why we spend most of our lives in a debugger, because we don't know the expected output even. So that's why you have to go line by line, inspect every line of execution, and tell if that is like an expected output. That's why it's very crazy. And yeah. Yeah. People think software engineers are solving problems. That's right, we solve a lot of problems. But what we spend the most time on is we try to identify what the problem is first. Because most of the time, a product manager or a product owner or a customer will come to you and say, hey, this thing doesn't work. And I see this as a result, as an output, but it's not what I expected. And then it's basically on your plate to find why it doesn't work. And that part is not fun, sometimes. Because then there's another person, a manager on top of you, and says, we have to fix this by tonight. I'm trying, but first I need to get what the problem is. Here it's very easy. You see, I gave it a total of 8, but it gave me 10, so it's obvious, but most of the time it's not. And yeah, this is where a lot of people have frustrations. And the reason why I started with debugging is, again, it's the foundation, the fundamental of solving problems. Identifying the problems first, and then trying to solve the problems. And it's the area that I see most engineers lack. They don't get what, there's a hand over there. They don't understand what debugging is. They don't know how they can debug. They can't figure out what may have gone wrong because it's not obvious. And yeah, unfortunately, you'll spend a lot of time with this. And if you get this right, you move so fast ahead of the competition, ahead of other engineers, that you'll be amazed of how people look at you if you're able to debug really fast. That's why I want to start with this. Because it's boring and nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to learn debugging. Nobody wants to improve on debugging because it's not fun. But you have to do it. You have to learn it extremely well, in and out, in various contexts to rise above the fold, please. Sorry? What are the skills? I think it's very much like hunting. To be a good hunter, you have to know the footprints of the animal that you want to hunt, right? You have to look at the soil and you have to see the tracks where no one else can see them. But if you can do that, you'll be able to follow that animal, and you have to set up a trap. You have to know how it moves, and you have to rely on your senses to predict where it will be. Like, these are the skills that are required for hunting. These are the skills that are required for bug hunting. You'll develop a skill to kind of estimate the potential problem points by just listening to the customer. When they just tell you, hey, like, I have a problem, this doesn't work, you will kind of develop a taste for it or a sense for it to pinpoint, yeah, like, there are 3 main areas which can break in the code, and you'll go and look at them first. And this is something that you can gain only by doing. And it's very instinctive. You have to use your instincts to be a good bug hunter. And that's why I really liken it to being an actual hunter. You have to, because imagine a forest and you want to hunt an animal, but then you have 1,000 animals around you, right? That's the case you'll run into when you're trying to debug something. You will be on a path, on a track to debug one specific bug, but you will see a lot of tracks lying around you, which will lead you to the wrong animal, or which will, just lead you out of the forest, because they will be human footprints. If you follow them, you'll go out of the forest. So you have to sense or know which one is the right track, and you have to follow that, and that will lead you to the exact bug. So it's really hard, and it will only improve if you put more time on it, and if you spend more time on it. And I'm pretty sure nobody teaches debugging first. It's always the last topic in computer science classes as well to teach. And correct me if I'm wrong, some of you are computer scientists here. Debugging is not something that is a very important topic at school, again, because it's most boring. But it's the crucial skill that will actually differentiate you from your other fellow software engineers at work. You'll be the person who they will come to when there's a bug, because you'll have that instinct, you'll have that understanding of how a bug could occur, and you'll solve their problems. And that's actually how you kind of rise up the ranks of software engineering. The more problems you solve for other software engineers, the more respect you earn from your fellow engineers. And that is, for me, let's say one of the quickest ways, again, because nobody wants to do that. So a lot of people want to do architecture, a lot of people want to write good code, but nobody wants to debug stuff. If you are the person who can debug everything in a very fast manner, then you'll be the go-to person for the problems, and that will solve most of your problems. I guess we're over time a little bit. Maybe if we have a break for like 15 minutes and then come back, would it work? All right. Thank you for nodding at least a little. So what we just did was, we press F5 and we get the result, right? This is how we run our code. It's still tedious. It's still a manual effort. I changed something. For example, I add another message, console log the end, and I have to press F5 again for it to execute. This is also tedious. I want an easier way to automate this process as well, so that it automatically runs whenever I make a change. Now there is a package, a Node.js module that some kind developer put out there as open source for us to download and make use of. And we'll just do that by installing that package. We go back to the terminal. I hope when you installed Node.js, npm also came with that. In some installations, probably on Linux, this may not work. Raise your hand if it doesn't. But what we'll do is, we'll type a command called npm install -g nodemon. So npm stands for Node Package Manager. Basically, we install some packages that are already built for us by developers so that we don't spend time reinventing the wheel all the time, but we make use of other people's work. And npm is the entry gateway for that. It basically allows us to install packages on our system like this useful package called nodemon. So -g stands for global. It means install this to the root of the computer so that it's available wherever I want, wherever I need. Wherever I need to run some JavaScript code, I can just type nodemon and it will run. Just press enter and it will install. And obviously nodemon is the name of the package. Now it may take some time to install, and hopefully we will not take the internet down when we try to do that like with 70 people. Will take some time. I will just cancel mine to help you out. So the command is npm install -g nodemon. Make sure to run it. It will run in the background, and hopefully you'll get a response. How do you know it's installed? Well, you type nodemon index.js, and you will get such an output like this. And if you don't, it means it's not installed yet. I said, have you tested? You write nodemon index.js. If you get such an output, it means it ran. If you don't, it didn't. What is a very good approach to test this is to create multiple terminals. There is a drop-down here, which lets you choose a terminal. I have one right now. You probably also have one. But you can add another one. So while the first one is trying to install nodemon, you can create another terminal by clicking the plus here. And it will basically create another one for you. Make sure you're in the right folder and type nodemon. Yay, dancing time. I guess, yeah. Yeah, the sensor is over there, back. Yay, thank you, Diego. But create another terminal and type nodemon index.js there, and you'll see if it's installed and if it's working. Raise your hand if you could get nodemon installed. That's good. What? You could. Like, you have nodemon installed. Raise your hand if you get nodemon. Fine. For the rest, just call for help. And yeah, I mean, it's all right. It will be there. We will take a couple of minutes for it to install. Terminal? Yeah. Yeah. So make sure the first terminal is trying to install nodemon. Again, the command was npm install -g nodemon. and create a new terminal so that we can write other code there. And you can still call node index.js and this will run. All right, make sure you can see this. And the other terminal is actually installing the NodeMon version. Okay. With the internet, yeah, that's normal. Don't panic. We'll have enough time for the NodeMon to install. Fortunately, we don't need it at the moment, but I wanted to make it as early as possible so that we have enough time to install that. So it's okay. I'll just go on with the new terminal. So don't worry, but keep an eye on it on the background that it should install. John? Okay. Now let's create our first backend project. How do we create our first backend project? We just created a source file, a JavaScript file. It's not a project on its own. A project needs a definition, like a cover page, right? It tells you, hey, this is a project. I'm a serious thing. That's why I'm a full blank page with only a single title in the center. We will do something similar with our backend project. We need something to tell us that, hey, this is an actual serious project, okay? How do we do that? We need to have a cover page. We need to have something like an index page, because all project definitions have indexes, right? It will tell you the third page is doing this, the fifth page is telling you that. How do we start a Node.js project? You can start with a source file, but again, it's only a single source file. It's not a project. What you do is you call npm init, npm a space, and you type init, which will initialize a new project for you. And you get some output here. It says this utility will walk you through creating a package.json file. It only covers the most common items and tries to guess sensible defaults. Blah, 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 a lot of stuff. But if you see at the end, it asks me for a package name. Now, naming is hard in computer science, and this is the first time you are asked to come up with a name. Like, the first time you want to create a project, you have to know the name, unfortunately. But of course, you can change it afterwards, no problem. I will just go and call it week 2. Which is already the default for me. The name of the folder is default. So I just hit enter. It asks me for the version. 100. Okay, again, the default is fine. Asks for a description and there is no default. Let's type something here. We can say week 2 project. Or anything you want. Asks for an entry point. Index.js is fine. If it's not already default for you, make sure it's index.js. You can still hit enter. There's something called the test command. There's no defaults for that. We will move on right now by pressing enter, and we will cover testing in our lecture 7. Asks for a Git repository. I will also pass on it for now. Keywords, nah, enter. Author, this is really important. Write your name, because you're the author of this project. And there's a special format for entering your email as well, which is a good idea if you want people to reach you. Or maybe you don't want them to reach you, but this will be open source, so it's a good idea. So you just use this smaller and greater than signs and type your email inside that. Asks for a license. Again, you are free to define which people are allowed to use this code. And the most common types are like ISC or MIT, which is a license invented at MIT. I use that one. And I press enter again, and it says, is this okay? And I look at it, looks okay. And I say yes. What it did is, if you notice, is it created something called a package.json in my folder. If you click that, you get an object definition, something that is very similar to what we had last week, and it has some of that information that we wrote. Okay, so this is your cover page. This is what defines your project. Every Node.js project has a package.json file. This is the definition of your project. This is the name of your project. This is the description, the author, and the main script of your project. Basically, anything that you will interact with in Node.js has this package.json file, okay? Raise your hands if you got this package.json. Good. Again, if you couldn't, just call for an instructor. And let's take a look at the NodeMon installation. Go to the previous terminal. Tell me if you couldn't install NodeMon yet, if you didn't get it yet. All right? Did everyone else install NodeMon? Raise your hands if you installed NodeMon. Yay! What are the other doing? Like, we have 70 people, 10 of them installed NodeMon, 5 of them couldn't install NodeMon. What are the 55 doing?
Trying again as admin.
Ah, that's a good idea. Oh, yay! That's a very good idea. If you're running on a Mac or a Linux computer, you may need sudo permissions, super user permissions. So you may need to write sudo npm install -g nodemon. Hopefully you don't, but if you do, don't worry about that. It doesn't run in Windows, so sudo is not meant for Windows, unfortunately. But I warned you against using Windows. Anyway, now that we have a package.json, we basically created our own first Node.js project. Okay? Let's go back. Let's try something else. Let's try installing another package to ease our job. So before I make any changes, the output is like hello world 10 and the end. This is what I'm seeing on the screen, okay? Now the customer comes in and says, this is all very good, but I want to see the end in red. Like, I want it printed in red and make it happen for me. Now I don't know how I can make that happen. I don't know how to print something in red in a console, but it's not my place to question what the customer wants, and I will try to do that, okay? What I do is, I go back to npmjs.com. This is the repository for 500,000 packages that you can use. And I want to see if there's something that I can use to help me write stuff in red. So I will type something like red console. And it will give me a couple of packages that I can use to do stuff. And you'll see there are a lot of packages that have colors in them. And that's fine. I can use some of them. Let's scroll down a bit. There is a package called ANSI Red. The color red in ANSI. It's a nice description. ANSI is actually American National Standards Institute. which kind of defines how colors should be spelled out in computer systems. So there is something called ANSI colors and ANSI characters. And this looks like something that I can work with. I click it, it says, you can install this with npm. And this is how you install it. npm E or I stands for install, npm I, ANSI red, and -- save. Actually, you can omit the -- save part, but I just copy it, and I take it back to the terminal and paste it. npm I, ANSI red. And it will go and install it for me, please.
Why did you not copy that save file?
Because it's not necessary. The version of npm just changed, and with the final version they said, when you're doing an npm install, you almost always want to save it anyway. So make it the default so that nobody needs to write save anymore. So it's the default, like by default it saves it to your file. Okay, so raise your hands if you could install ANSI red. That's good. That's great. Walk around and see if people could do that. Okay. Go to package.json. Open the file again. Raise your hand if you see something different from the last time we opened this. Please.
ANSI red.
Yeah, there is a new edition called Dependencies, and it lists ANSI red and the version number here on our package.json file, which means this is now a dependency of our project. Our project now depends on ANSI red. So whenever somebody installs your project, they will also install ANSI red automatically because your project will use it or will want to use it. So let's make use of it. Run the project. You still get no colors because we didn't make use of it. Now we'll make use of ANSI red library. But before that, I want to ask a second time, raise your hands if you couldn't install NodeMon. All right, a few people. And raise your hands if you could install NodeMon, that it's working for you. Perfect. Let's then try that. So I type NodeMon index.js and let's make a change in this file. Let's change the end message, save it, and it will automatically update the file. Yeah.
Can you specify how to add the dependency again?
Sorry?
Can you specify how to add the dependency again?
Yeah, you just install a library. It's automatically added to the dependencies.
So it automatically adds to
Yeah, it's automatic. You don't need to do anything. Sorry. But this is the goal of NodeMon. All right. I type something, and I save the file, and it reruns the code for me. That is perfect. Now I don't have to type F5, or I don't have to click debug or anything. It's just working for me. I'm trying it again, and it runs. Raise your hands if you could get this functionality, if this worked for you. All right? Let's make sure this works for everybody. So the idea is, basically, whenever you change a file, it reruns the whole script, the whole code, basically. All right.
Why is it called NodeMon?
Because it means node monitor. It monitors the changes, and when there's a change, it reruns the code. And it runs node code.
It's not like Pokemon.
Yeah. No, it's not like Pokemon. Yeah. You change the message and it reruns. Make sure you get this. If you can't, hopefully one of the co-instructors will help you out. Again, if you could get this, but the person next to you couldn't get this, help them. Sorry? Node.mon index.js. Like this. Node.mon index.js. Even Node.mon works. Like you can only type Node.mon and it will still work. Okay, did you get this? All right. Now, we installed a new library called ANSI Red. Why did we do that? What was the requirement? Raise your hand and answer the question. Red text. Because the customer wanted us to print this text in red. The text on the end in red, right? And we are in no position to question them. So let's go ahead and do that. How do I make use of a library in another programming language that you know of? Sorry? Require? Yeah. Or you import it. Or you say using. Or you say using namespace something. So the idea is there is a library out there somebody else wrote for you, and you want to import it to your code, and you want to make use of that. So your software, your project, your code depends on another library. Or if you paraphrase it, your code requires the other library to be exist in order to run. That's a good keyword, and we will keep that in JavaScript. And we will make sure we require the other library to be present before we run something. So how we do that is we create a new variable, const red, okay? If you save it, you will get an error. And it says app crashed, waiting for file changes before starting. That's nice. Let's change the file. I will say require, and whenever I type the code, you'll see that it already gives me the library that I have installed, ANSI Red. I save it again, and it works, but the message is not in red right now. It's somehow I need to make use of this. So normally, you go back to npm, and it tells you how to use that. Yeah, we kind of did the same, required ANSI Red. But unfortunately, this package doesn't tell you how to actually use it. You have to figure it out yourself. This is not the best way to make open source code, like without telling people how to use it. Whenever you make some code open source, make sure you tell them exactly how they can make use of your library, make use of your code. But fortunately, we can imagine how it's used. It's basically a function, and whenever you type a parentheses, you see that it's asking for a message. I put that in console log, okay? Beforehand, it was console log quote the end. It's now console log red in parentheses, which means the function execution, the end. And I save the file, it automatically reloads, and you see the message is actually in red right now. Raise your hands if you got this. Whoa, you're fast. I love that. Good. Yes. So this is something we covered last week. So fortunately, you can go back to our recording from the last week and listen the whole story behind it. But we use const or let and almost never var. Var is the old way of doing stuff because we are hipsters, we are new and cool. we use the latest and the greatest, and the latest and the greatest are constant let, so that's why we use them. No, of course not, but the actual explanation is there in the previous lecture. Okay, now that you got all of this, let's go back to our homeworks and what we did for the first week, okay? Now, I want to map that effort of last week and your homeworks to a backend project. I want to go over how we would develop that if it were a backend project, if it ran on Node.js. And I will start with the same thing I did with the person class, okay? Just in the Node context, and I will show you that it's actually running. Now, if you remember, we just used a single file last week, right? Every single line of code was on the same file. Now, it's not obviously the best approach. Why? Because, for example, Microsoft Excel has like over 10 million lines of code. You wouldn't want that to be present on a single file. So it's a good idea to break up the code that you write into multiple files that you can actually, reason about. So what we do is we create our own modules. We create our own libraries. Or, we create other packages that we can require and use in our own source code so that we can manage the complexity of that 10 million lines of code. So we will start with that. Putting every line of source code on a single file is not an option. And we should break out our code into multiple files. Where do you think a good start is? Just imagine what we did last week. We had some classes, right? And we had some code that initialized those classes. And yeah, it was mostly that, I guess. And then you, in your homeworks, did create several different classes. What do you think is a sensible approach to break down your code? Yeah. Sorry, there's a little bit of noise. I can't hear you well. Maybe we can try to keep the noise level a little bit down. And maybe if you could, again. Yeah. Yeah. So the idea is to put your class files into individual, you put your classes into individual files. So if you have a person class, you have an individual person file that includes that class. If you have a friendship class, if you have a team class, or if you have instructors class, you have different files for these. Now, it doesn't really have to be this way, but this is one of the best approaches, and this is what we're going to follow throughout this course. So now that we have the infamous red, let's put it here. Okay. And let's save it. So we see the red in hello world. So if you remember, what I did last week was I defined a class called person. I gave it a constructor and 2 parameters. And I did this name this age equals age. Okay? And then I said const Arman, for example, equals new person. And the name is, and age is 33. So I save it, I still get the red console log message. And I can type console log Arman. And when I save it, I get the output. This is an instance of a person. The person has the name Arman, and the age is 33. I obviously record the screen of this session as well, so you'll be able to download this tomorrow or watch it on YouTube. If you just, need to go over the material again, you will have a lot of opportunity and time to do so. All right, raise your hands if you got this far. Okay, make sure you get this far. You have a person class, again on a single file, it's index.js, and we create a person, please create yourselves, and then you log it and you see the log on the end. Raise your hand if you have a trouble about this thing, and one of my friends will come and help you.
There's supposed to be a brace in 10.
Sorry?
There's supposed to be a brace in line 10.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is based, it marks the end of the person class. All right. Does it work? Raise your hands if it works for you. All right, still the same amount of people. Sorry? How do I get red for only the name? Oh, it doesn't work. No matter. We don't actually need the red portion right now. I'm not sure. It could be anything, but Juan is there to look into that. I actually wonder what happens if I put this in red. Oh, it converts it to a string. It's not helpful. But I can do this.
Is it too bad if there is some mixed space or there is one?
No, doesn't matter. But it's good to have a clear structure and consistent spacing.
Yeah, but if it's just one.
No problem. If it's just fun, go on and fix it. Okay. Raise your hands if you got this. Okay. This is important. Raise your hand and tell me what is not working for you. Please? Okay? No? Yeah. Did you put red around it? Remove that, and it will work. But I don't use red for the object because then it gives me something else that I don't want. In fact, let's just go and remove that. Okay. John. Yeah, maybe that table could use some help. Tiago, here, and John there. Yeah, over that table. Yeah, those guys may use some help. Yeah, just make sure that everything is okay there. Anna? Anna? Yay! Come on, this is something we did last week. Just type it and it will work. Raise your hands if you got this part. Okay. All right. Raise your hands if you got this part. Okay. That's a good number of people, so I can continue. Now, this is what we did last week, and I told you that we want to break down our classes into individual files because this is not scalable to have 1,000 different classes on a single file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another file, another JavaScript file, and I do that by going to the create new file icon here in my folder view, and I type person.js because the name of the class was person. So please go ahead and create a new file and take the definition of the class, which is this part, class person, and put it in that person file. Okay?
Should I name it myself?
What? Yeah, just use person.js as the name. And cut the code from the initial file, index.js, and put it in person file. All right? Yeah, raise your hand if you need help. All right, over there, there. Jessica, we need some help here. So again, how do you create a file? Do you go to the Explorer bar here? It's this icon. There's a create new file. You create it. It's called person.js. And you paste the class here. All right. Raise your hand if you got this far. Good. That's nice. So, as you see, there's an error on the console, on terminal. It says person is not defined because I'm running this index.js and I'm using the person and it's undefined. Why? I didn't require it yet. I didn't define the person yet. So again, if you remember, how do I require another library? I type const person equals what? Tell me. Require. And this time, this is important. When you type the code, it offers you ANSI red, but we don't want that. We want our own person class, right? Now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to type a dot, which signifies the current folder that I'm in, the current directory that I'm in. I'll put a slash. Slash means list me the files that are under the current directory. And you see you already have a list that you can choose from, and I will choose person. So this is how you require another class that you write. I save it, and it says person is not a constructor. Now it's a different message. Previously it was person was undefined. Now it's defined, but it's not a constructor. What could it be? Let's take the person here. What is the problem? What? We have to export it. Are you a seasoned JavaScript developer? You look like one. Yeah. The idea is we just defined the class here, but that's just all. We just defined it. We didn't let the world know that this class is something that you can use. So how do we do that? We need to export the class. Now, there is a somewhat like an interesting syntax which changed with the new version of JavaScript, but I'm going to show you the current stable version that runs in every node installation. And it's like module.exports. Because every file in Node.js is a module on its own. Every file is a single body, a single unit, a module that you can require and run. So that's why it's called module. And exports is a variable on that module that you can redefine however you like. So, for example, we just made it a class. We said this module, this person module, exports a person class. It kind of reads literally. This module exports class person, right? I save it, and then I see that it worked. Yay, it worked. Raise your hands if it worked for you. Yay, that's good. Perfect. Well, we now separated our code into multiple modules and make them work together. This is a real achievement. This is not something to be taken lightly. But let's write more code. Let's create another person. And maybe let's dance. Yay, thank you. Let's create another person. Okay? And let's save it. We didn't log that person. Let's log that person. So you have the second person as well. If you remember what we did before, we created an array called instructors. And we added those people to the instructors array and just log that. This is what you get when you log it. Make sense? Yeah. So there's one more thing that I want to show you today, and that is writing to files and reading from files. All right. Now, I want to be able to save the people that I create to a file, and I want to be able to read them from a file so that I don't have to recreate them all the time. Okay? It's kind of a database. If you heard the name database, it's basically a bunch of files on a computer somewhere in the world that just saves some records. And actually, these are records. Each person is a record in our database, or a line in our Excel file. So let's make it happen. Let's create kind of a database and save the people that we create there. Raise your hands if this sounds frightening. Okay, that's good. It's not. It's really easy. And this is how it all started. people used files, raw files for databases for a very, very, very long time. It's just only recently that we moved on to complicated software systems for databases. So we will create a database now and save it to a file. Let's create a new class, or let's create a new module that will save the database for me. What do? I go here, create a new file, call it database.js. Okay? I have a new file, and I will create two functions here. One is the save, and the other will be the load, and hopefully it will work. I define a function, save, which should take in some people, okay? And it should do something with them. It will write them to a file. Let's first say that it will just console log them so that we will see. So I do console log people, all right? Now, if you notice, I didn't export it yet, but I should. So how do I do that? I either type module.exports.save is equals a function, or exports.save equals a function. It's up to you. And this is the arrow syntax, so you don't need the function keyword. Okay? You save it, obviously nothing happens because we didn't require it in our real code. How do I require it? I go to the index file, I type const database require database. And if you wonder how I got the second window here, it's basically this button over there, split editor. It just gives you the second window so you can start working in split mode. Here it is. And you can create 3 windows. So now I kind of imported the database, let's say, required the database. Let's use a breakpoint. I'm complicating it a little bit intentionally. Let's use a breakpoint. And let's hit F5 or run here. And see that it will break there. The execution will break at that line. And you can see what variables are here. For example, you have the person variable, which is a class. Or you have the database, which is an object. And you see the save variable inside, which is another function that will save the variable for us. So it looks like we could load the database, right? Let's kind of make use of it. I will stop the execution because I got what I wanted. I wanted to see if I could load the database, and apparently I could. So I'm just stopping it.
Where did you see the database?
I ran the debug code. I had a breakpoint on line 4, and I just scrolled a little bit on the variables part, and I have the database there. So I saw that it worked for me. Okay, I remove the sidebar again. Let's go back. So we had the console log instructors here, right? I want to save them to the database. So what I do is I call database.save and give it some people, instructors, and let's save the code, and we still see the console log. What happened here? I created 2 people, I called them instructors, and I told my database to save them for me, right? I said database.save, and I gave it the list of instructors. Currently, it's not doing anything. It's not saving it anywhere. It's just logging it to the screen. You know, instead of logging people to the screen, I could say, hey, I received your request, but I'm currently kind of busy. You have to escape that. And if you save it, you will see the new message. This basically proves that I'm hitting the save function over here. Raise your hands if you could follow so far. Good. We are starting to lose people. Try to keep up as much as you can with the code. If you can't, don't panic. Again, all of this will be hopefully in YouTube tomorrow. If not, you will definitely get the source code. So don't worry about that. Just try to focus on understanding how this thing works. All right? So I'm going back to logging the people. And currently it gives me the list of people. Yeah. Currently it's just logging. It's logging a message to the console. And in a few minutes, it will be saving a file to the file system. It will be creating a new file that will include the people details. We will see it in the editor. But we're currently not doing that.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I don't know, it was not clear to follow why we would do that.
Okay, the idea is I want a file to contain the details of people. Because let's say I'm building a contacts app. So I need a file that I can pass around that will keep the details of people and that I don't have to run these 2 lines all the time to create people. This is just an initial code that I write. And then I will save this as a database. And from then on, I will be able to load this database and do operations on that. Like find some contacts. Does that make sense? That's why I need kind of a database. And I'm creating that database right now. I will create that database right now. But the first step is to get a function that will do the save operation for me. That's why I defined a new module called database. And I imported or required that module here. And I created a new method called save, which will hopefully save the list of people I give it. Make sense? Okay. Now, how do we do that? In Node.js, there is a special built-in module called file system, which is not available in the browsers. So it allows us to communicate or interact with the file system. We can read files, we can read directories, or we can create files. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import that here, or require it here. I do const fs equals require fs. Fs is the short form of file system. So you require that. You can save the file and see that it doesn't really crash still. Now, I want to create a file that includes the list of people that I receive here. I want to write these people to a file. Does the sentence make sense? I want to write these people to a file so that I can later on read them. How do I do that? I start by typing fs and hitting dot or point, and it gives me properties or functions that are available in the file system module. I scroll down a little bit, you see there are a lot of different functions: create read stream, create write stream, link, make directories, open, read directory, read file. Read file sounds nice. I will use it when I want to open my database. And if you go to the end, there is also a function called write file. I'll be using that one. Actually, I'll be using write file sync, and this is a topic for next week, the difference between a synchronous operation and an asynchronous operation. For the time being, for the sake of simplicity, I'll just use write file sync as a function. If you put parentheses there, it will tell you what you need to give it. You need to give it a path that is either a string, a number, buffer, or a URL, some data, and some options maybe. Let's give it a file name. It's asking for a path. So if you remember, we start with a dot and a slash to indicate the current working directory that I'm in. And I will type the name data.json. So fs write file sync in parentheses data.json. What should follow is a string of what you want to type there. All right? What you want to write there. Let's first write hello world. I save it. Oh, it went crazy. Why is it going crazy? Because all the time, every time this executes, it creates a new file called data.json. And that new file actually retriggers nodemon to reload the script. That goes back to saving the database again. That creates a new file. It reloads the script. So this really didn't work for us. But what fortunately we can do is, and you don't have to do this right now, but you can quit nodemon and you can give it, oh, yeah, sure. You can ignore some files with it. What? So whenever I'm running this, it's creating a new file for me. And nodemon, when there's a new file or a file change, restarts the process. When it restarts, it's creating another file. Then since there's a new file, it restarts again. So this is an infinite loop, basically. But anyway, we don't have a lot of time, so I won't deal with that. I'll just run the code with node index.js, and you have it, and you see the file here has the word hello world. So because I just wrote hello world there. Now let's try to save the people that were passed in, okay? And let's see how this will update. I run the code again, and you see it automatically updated here by saying object, 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 object. This happens because in the end, this is a text file, okay? And it expects us to send it some text or a string, but we gave it objects. And unfortunately, when you try to convert an object into a string or text in JavaScript, this thing is what you get, object, object. So that's not fun, really. It doesn't list the names of the people or anything. So what I'm gonna do is I will try to convert this object or an array into a string. Now there's a special function for that you have to know that it's there. But it's basically under the object called JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's a way to save objects, JavaScript objects in text, hence JavaScript Object Notation. And there's a method on it called stringify. You pass it the object people and save it and run it, and it automatically updates with the contents of your people array. All right? This is something proprietary that you need to know that is there. There is an object called JSON. It has a function called stringify, and when you call it with an object, it gives you the string version of it. And that's what we did. Basically, we just converted our people object to a string and saved it in the JSON file, in the data JSON file. And here's the output. We have an object called name and age. That's the first person. And this is the second person. Okay? Makes sense? Raise your hand if you're lost. And it's perfectly fine to be lost. It's kind of intended to lose some of you up until this point. Because we cannot learn or we cannot grow unless we are out of our comfort zones or unless we're lost. So it's just normal. Just call an instructor and they will help you. So I will quickly wrap today's class up with one final mechanism to read the data from the database. Because without it, it would be incomplete. I kind of have like 5 minutes to do so. So please watch me, follow me, try to understand. You don't have to type these stuff. Because again, hopefully, if it doesn't crash, this will be in YouTube tomorrow. And we can always discuss on Slack. So let's create a function called load. It doesn't take any parameters because it will just load stuff from the database and it will return it to us. So what I have is the one we saw before, read file sync. We use write file sync to write stuff, and then we're trying to read stuff from a file. That's why we use read file sync. And we give it the name data.json. Now, the load function is there. Let's try to use that. I create a new variable called loaded file, and I will just do database.load. And I will log the loaded file. Okay? I save it. Okay. Okay. What I get is some numbers. This is the raw form of a file. It's just a buffer, an array of numbers. And I need to indicate, hey, this is actually a text file. How do I do that? I just type a second parameter for the read file sync. This is something you need to remember, again. And in quotes, you give it UTF-8. UTF-8 is the name of an encoding, a string encoding, which is kind of like an algorithm or a function that the computers use to convert those numbers into legible, readable text. So if you don't have UTF-8, you'll get numbers. Because that's the raw form. That's the binary form, if you will. If you have the UTF-8, you'll get a string, a meaningful string out of this. Okay. Now I wrote something to the database and read those records from the database, which actually works well. But let's see if I can access the first instructor, like the 0th instructor. Can I? No. Normally this should have worked, right? Because if you say instructor 0, you get the person. You get name and age. That works. But it doesn't work if I load the database. It just gives me a single character. Why is that? Because, again, this is the tricky part. UTF-8 is just text. It's just a string. So we're just getting the first character of the string. This is not an object. I need to convert this string to an object right now. How do I do that? There's another function called parse on the JSON object. I say json.parse, and I give it this text file. And when you run it, you get the instructor. So now loaded file 0 actually returns the actual person, and you can even ask for its age, and you have it there. Okay? Good? Okay.
After I did this in the database,
Yeah.
where should I put the changes in database, right?
Well, we don't put any changes there, but it's automatically there for us.
No.
Yes. The database saves it there for us. Here, the function does that. But anyway, we will go through this again in the next class and build on top of this. But this is as far as we'll get this class. And obviously, we'll have homework again for next week, right? What is the homework? The homework is, if you did last week's homework, you are lucky. You will just break it down to different classes and different modules, different files, and make it work with Node.js, as we just did here. Create individual modules for each class that you have, and then make them work with this structure. You don't need a database. It will come next week. If you didn't do the homework last week, your homework is to design a real-life scenario with classes and their interactions. Like, we talked about making a reservation, getting a haircut, going to a soccer match, going to a hospital and being diagnosed, or going to a class, or anything that you can imagine, buying something, shopping, or drinking Coke, whatever you want. Design classes and interactions between different classes. A person, a bottle, and water. Water goes into the bottle, a person takes the bottle and drinks it. Design this with methods and objects and variables and properties, and make it work not in the browser, but in Node.js. Okay? This is the homework for next week. And again, please put them on GitHub. Learn how to use GitHub. And I want to see all your code on GitHub. The homework is to come up with a real-life scenario and to model a real-life use case, a scenario, in Node.js with classes and by their interactions. If you want, you can also watch last week's screen recording to get up to date. And again, please feel free to ask us questions all week long. It doesn't help if you do the homework the last minute because we cannot help you. And yeah, that is kind of it for the homework, okay?
Where should I download it? The homework.
The homework,
Yeah, so that you could see.
you upload it to GitHub. GitHub. And I'm pretty sure people will be able to help you here. So I hope the homework is clear. I expect several modules, several files, several classes to work in a Node.js context, okay? I want to see your package.json file. And that's mostly it. I have another announcement. Before we leave, we have to do two things. First, pack up and clean your tables. The bottles will go on the back to the kitchen. And we have another board, the feedback board there, with a lot of post-its for you to rate the class and give us feedback. Feel free and be open. You don't have to write your name on it, but just let us know what you think and what we can do for you, how we can improve. Did you like something or did you not like something? So that we will take them into account and try to make our best the next session. Yeah, that's the feedback wall, and we clean up the tables. Do we have anything else?
If you guys want to just doodle something, you have a side on the right side. You don't have to actually write a word. If you want to just draw a heart or just anything, you have the right side for that.
Yeah. So we have a feedback wall. On the left side, you have post-its that you can write stuff on. On the right side, you have a free board that you can draw stuff if you feel like it. And that's mostly it. I'm here for, I don't know, 10 more minutes. So if you have questions, I will come around and try to answer them. And we'll hopefully meet on Slack. Please, let's meet on Slack. I want you to be more active on Slack and come up with questions and projects, and we'll make this happen. Thank you.